There are moments in life when a strange whisper enters the soul, a whisper that unsettles everything you thought you knew about yourself and the world. RLD. It is not the loud shout of authority or the bright advertisement that flashes across your screen. It is something quieter, more insistent, like the murmur of an ancient river cutting through stone. That whisper asks, are you truly yourself? Or are you simply the collection of names, labels, and masks handed to you at birth? It does not demand an immediate answer. It lingers, haunting you with its persistence, demanding that you pause, long enough to feel the weight of the question. For many, the rhythm of daily life makes such questions unbearable. We are told who we are before we have even drawn our first breath in independence. Son or daughter, student or worker, citizen, consumer, believer in this or that flag. None of these labels were chosen, yet they become the scaffolding of identity, as though reality itself is a play, and the roles were distributed without our consent. If the world is indeed a stage, then are you the main character of your own existence, or merely an audience member seduced into thinking the spotlight belongs to you, when in truth it shines elsewhere? The teaching attributed to Thoth, the enigmatic figure of wisdom and hidden knowledge, does not rive with the urgency of a warning siren. It comes like a lantern in the fog, faint at first, but growing clearer the more you allow your eyes to adjust to its glow. Spiritual awake people quit these things slowly, the message says. Slowly. The word itself carries a rhythm that feels ancient, deliberate. It acknowledges that awakening is not a violent eruption, but a gradual peeling away of illusions, one fragile layer at a time. The fabric of our world is woven with these illusions, threads of fear, threads of desire, threads of distraction. To awaken spiritually is not to tear the fabric apart in a single reckless gesture, but to learn where to tug, where the weave begins to loosen, until finally the garment of falsehood slips from your shoulders, the freedom within. We possess freedom of choice, freedom of thought often reveals itself as nothing more than a clever trick of mirrors. You choose between brands, but the same corporations feed them both. You elect between candidates, but their strings are pulled by the same unseen hands. Even your imagination is channeled, directed toward what is acceptable, consumable, profitable. You are invited to rebel, but only in ways that can be measured, packaged, and sold back to you. Is that freedom? Or is it simply the performance of freedom, staged for your comfort? Consider how easily we are to accept the boundaries of the stage. The clock dictates when you wake, when you eat, when you rest. Money determines what you may dream of owning, where you may live, whom you may impress, even him. Oceans are commodified happiness through products, grief through rituals purchased from corporations, and yet something within resists, something ancient, something remembers that the true measure of a soul is not in its ability to conform, but in its willingness to awaken. To awaken is to notice the cracks in the scenery, the curtain that sways when the wind of truth blows through. He actors who stumble in their lines, betraying the artificiality of the play. It is to recognize that the pillars holding up this reality are not eternal stone, but fragile cardboard. And when you see it, when you truly see it, the question rises, why play along? Why keep reciting the lines written for you by powers that see you not as a sovereign being, but as a source to be consumed? Yet awakening is never instantaneous. Even the word quit in Thoth's declaration carries weight. You quit habits, addictions, illusions, but you quit them. And slowly. To wake up from a deep dream is not to leap immediately from the bed. You blink, you stretch, you stumble. Your eyes struggle against the light. Your body resists the transition, so too does the soul. Resist its own liberation. We cling to the chains because they are familiar. We cling to illusions because they are comfortable. The prison becomes a home. the cell a place of safety. To leave it requires courage, and courage is cultivated step by step. Imagine a bird born inside a golden cage. The bars gleam, the food arrives on schedule, the world outside is unknown and threatening. To open the cage door is not enough. The bird must first believe in the strength of its own wings. Spiritual awakening is this slow recognition of wings long forgotten. One day you test them, another day you flutter a little further, until, finally, you soar into skies unbounded. But no one can force the moment. It must arrive organically, like dawn creeping across the horizon. This is why Thoth speaks not of revolution, but of patience. Not of sudden rupture, but of gradual peeling. Those who are awake quit slowly because they understand that every chain removed leaves behind a scar, and every scar must be tended to before the next link can be broken. Awakening is not a sprint. It is a pilgrimage. Along the way, illusions will tempt you to stop, to rest in half-truths, to mistake one freedom for the whole. Yet the whisper persists. It does not let you settle. It pushes you forward, and so we stand at the threshold of inquiry, peering into the cosmic mirror where our true selves are reflected not as citizens or consumers, not as titles or professions, but as fragments of infinite consciousness temporarily veiled in flesh and bone. What you thought was freedom is revealed as theater. What you thought was reality is revealed as dream. The only question now is whether you will step beyond the stage, whether you will quit slowly, deliberately, until nothing false remains. This is the path. This is the beginning. And the whisper continues to echo. Are you awake, or merely dreaming of awakening? When we begin to unravel the message hidden in spiritual awake people quit these things. Slowly, Thoth, we find that its heartbeat lies not in mystical abstraction, but in the everyday fabric of our lives. Awakening is not about fleeing into mountains or retreating into temples. Though those paths can serve as mirrors, it is about looking at the structures we take for granted: politics, technology, education, entertainment, and recognizing the invisible architecture that binds them all together. These structures form the invisible stage, and we have been trained to applaud their performance without ever asking who wrote the script. One of the first illusions we must confront is the story of freedom in the age of information. We are told that the internet was humanity's great liberation, a gift of connection across continents, the end of isolation. Yet its roots lie in military projects, in systems designed not for empowerment, but for surveillance and control. What began as a tool for a war has been carefully polished and sold as a tool for personal liberation, and we, eager for a connection, walked willingly into the digital panopticon. Every click, every like, every scroll becomes a bead on the rosary of data, prayed over not by saints, but by algorithms you thought you were exploring. In truth, you were being mapped. Social media promised friendship and community, but beneath its glittering surface lies the machinery of manipulation. The image you project online is not yours alone. It is shaped, nudged, and monetized. Each post is weighed for its capacity to stir emotion, because emotion is the currency of control. Rage travels fastest, fear lingers longest. Joy is too fleeting to be profitable and less packaged. And so your heart becomes a commodity. Your relationships become metrics. Your soul is reduced to engagement statistics on someone else's balance sheet. The spiritual awake person sees this and begins the slow withdrawal, the careful disentangling from a system that feeds on attention. But it is not only technology. Look closer at the men and women we call leaders. Politicians stand at podiums, their voices trembling with conviction, their gestures rehearsed. Yet behind the curtain, scripts are written by think tanks and lobbies, directed by elites who never appear on stage. We are offered choices that are no choices at all. The left hand and the right hand belong to the same body, and the body itself bows to hidden masters, To awaken spiritually is to see through this theater, to understand that democracy without consciousness is simply another form of managed consent. It is to realize that you are never meant to be represented, you were meant to be distracted. Education. 2. Souls as a subtle chain. From childhood, we are trained to memorize rather than to question, to compete rather than to collaborate. Knowledge is carved into categories, boundaries that make curiosity obedient. History is edited to serve national myths, science is bent toward industry. Art is measured by market value, and so the soul, which yearns to explore freely, is taught to color within the lines. By the time one graduates, the ability to ask dangerous questions has been dulled. Spiritual awakening is, in part, the painful process of remembering how to ask those questions again, even when the answers threaten the foundations of comfort. Even entertainment, which we imagine as innocent escape, is a carefully crafted opiate. Films, sports, music all are saturated with symbols, narratives, and rhythms designed to keep consciousness entranced. The gladiatorial games of Rome were not so different from the global spectacles of today. Only now the arenas glow in high definition. Heroes and villains parade across screens, teaching you what to desire, what to fear, what to celebrate. The spectacle disguises itself as leisure, but beneath it lies ritual. To cheer, to weep, to argue over the outcome of games is to channel energy into structures that feed off collective focus. In each of these domains, politics, media, technology, education, the pattern is the same. Illusion is presented as freedom. Control is hidden behind choice. Ritual is disguised as entertainment. The awake soul begins to notice the pattern, begins to see that the fabric of life has been woven with threads of manipulation. And here is the most unsettling realization. It is not a conspiracy of a few men in dark rooms. It is a system so vast, so deeply embedded, that it perpetuates itself. The machine does not require constant instruction, it feeds on the momentum of habit. We sustain it every time we comply unthinkingly, every time we surrender our energy to it. This is why Thoth insists on quitting slowly. To awaken in one violent moment might shatter the mind, leaving one lost in paranoia or despair. But to awaken gradually, to recognize each chain for what it is, to loosen it gently, this is the path of entrance, the spiritual awake. Person does not escape the world, but learns to move through it with new eyes. They withdraw their energy not with anger, but with clarity. They recognize that each refusal, each shift in awareness, weakens the system's hold. The themes, then, are clear. Illusion versus truth, freedom versus control, performance versus reality. At every level of society, the same duality repeats, a fractal pattern visible to anyone willing to look. The illusions are seductive because they are convenient. The truth is demanding because it requires courage. Yet the choice is always there, hidden in plain sight. Remain asleep and play the role assigned to you, or begin the slow and deliberate process of awakening. As these realizations deepen, the world begins to look different. The billboards lose their charm. The news anchors sound hollow. The political debates resemble puppet shows. What once seemed solid begins to flicker like a hologram, and behind the flicker lies the faint glow of something eternal. This is the beginning of symbolic vision, the ability to see beyond surface into pattern, beyond event into archetype. And so we close this second movement of our journey. The stage has been revealed, the props exposed, the actors unmasked. But behind the curtain lies something older, something stranger, something more enduring. To understand why the same patterns repeat across empires and eras, why the same symbols echo through time, we must dive deeper still. To truly understand why spiritually awake people quit slowly, We must enter the realm of symbols, for symbols are the language of the unseen architecture. They are not arbitrary decorations on the surface of history. They are codes, bridges between worlds, carrying memory across centuries. Empires rise and fall, but the symbols remain, and when you begin to notice their persistence, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Why is it that the eye of open, unblinking eye appears across so many civilizations, from the Eye of Horus in ancient Egypt to the all-seeing eye set upon the unfinished pyramid on the American dollar? The same motif gazes back at us. It is as though history itself has been stitched together with this single vision, reminding us that someone, somewhere, always watches. The eye is not simply an image. It is a ritual technology, a way to train consciousness into submission. When you see the eye, part of you remembers that your actions are not entirely private. A subtle anxiety awakens. You adjust yourself, as though under surveillance, even when no guard is present. In this way, a symbol becomes more powerful than an army. The pyramid, too, repeated across continents, speaks not only of architectural brilliance but of hierarchy crystallized in stone. Wide at the base, narrow at the peak, it tells a story about power. The many sustain the few. The structure is not natural, it is imposed. And yet, because it is monumental, enduring, it begins to feel inevitable. To stand before a pyramid is to feel the weight of time press upon you, whispering that order must always be this way. But the spiritually awake see through it. They recognize that pyramids are not eternal truths, but staged realities, built to channel energy upward, away from the people. Out the apex where ritual kingship resides. And then there are the laurel wreaths, crowns, and odes passed from monarch to monarch, repeating the same ceremonies century after century. Why such repetition? Why the insistence on dressing each new ruler in the same robes, marching them through the same cathedrals, burying them in the same styles of tombs? Because ritual preserves continuity. Bloodlines are not merely genetics. They are vessels for ritual memory. Each coronation is not an event, it is a reenactment of the original covenant, a reaffirmation that the order endures, that the play must continue. The symbols do not simply decorate the ritual, they animate it. Without them, the magic would falter. Consider also the way funerals of rulers. Whole coronations, the same hymn sung in different keys, the same processions reversed. Death itself becomes a mirror of enthronement, as though to remind the living that power does not die. It only changes form. The body may be lowered into the ground, but the ritual ensures the continuity of authority. Spectacle is offered to the masses, but ritual is enacted for the hidden order. What the people perceive as theater is, to the architects, a technology of control. Even in our modern age, these symbols persist. Think of the flags waving at every sporting event, the hand over heart pledged before the anthem, the fireworks at state celebrations. These are not random entertainments. They are ritual technologies designed to stir archetypes, to bind the individual into the collective dream. The awake soul begins to see it. Why do we enact the same gestures, the same songs, the same salutes, generation after generation? Because repetition imprints memory deeper than logic. What you repeat becomes fewer. And so nations, corporations, and empires repeat their symbols endlessly, until the very sight of them awakens reflexive loyalty. And yet, the moment you see through this repetition, something strange happens. The symbols lose their grip. The eye becomes just an eye, unable to intimidate. The pyramid becomes just a pile of stones. No longer sacred, the anthem becomes just a song. No longer binding, the ritual collapses, and with it collapses the invisible architecture that fed on your unconscious participation. This is why awakening is such a threat, not because it destroys armies, but because it dissolves spells, the spiritually awake person, then learns to navigate symbols differently. They no longer consume them passive, but interpret them, decode them, reclaim them. An eagle is no longer a sign of imperial conquest, but a reminder of vision and flight. Fireworks are no longer a distraction, but a symbol of energy bursting free. The laurel wreath ceases to be a crown of control and becomes a reminder of inner victory. In this way, awakening does not merely strip symbols of their power, it transforms them. What was once a chain becomes a key. This is why quitting slowly matters. If you attempt to strip every symbol of meaning in one moment, the world collapses into chaos, and chaos breeds despair. But if you approach gently, peeling away illusion after illusion, you begin to see the skeleton of meaning beneath. You recognize that behind every pyramid lies the memory of the mountain. Behind every crown lies the circle of the sun. Behind every eye lies the reflection of your own. To awaken is not to reject symbols entirely, but to learn to read them truthfully, to reclaim them from the hands of those who would use them against you. And so the journey deepens. What seemed like random decoration reveals itself as ritual continuity. What seemed like history reveals its elf as theater. What seemed like entertainment reveals itself as sacred technology. And in seeing this, you begin to understand why Thoth whispers of quitting slowly. Because each symbol carries a world, and worlds must be unraveled. Carefully, the stage has been revealed, the props unmasked, and now the very language of the play, the symbols themselves, has been decoded. But what good is such vision if it remains only in theory? How can these insights be lived, breathed, embodied in daily life? How does one move through the modern world with this symbolic awareness without falling into despair or detachment? That is the next step. It is one thing to see the architecture of illusion, to trace its symbols across history and watch the rituals repeat like clockwork, but awareness without application risks becoming a burden. To awaken spiritually is not only to perceive the hidden structures, but to reclaim the power to live differently. If the system feeds on your attention, your fear, your unexamined participation, then the way forward is not to fight it on its own terms, but to withdraw your energy and redirect it toward what is alive, luminous, and real. Fear, for instance, is not just a passing emotion, it is fuel. Entire empires are constructed on the harvesting of fear. Governments thrive on fear of enemies, external or internal. Markets move on fear of loss or scarcity. Media survives by amplifying fear, making sure you return each day to check what new disaster might unfold. Fear creates a low vibration atmosphere, an invisible field that chains consciousness in survival mode. But once you see fear for what it is, a resource, an energy they harvest, you can choose not to contribute. You can feel fear without feeding it. You can acknowledge its presence and yet decline to turn it into currency for their rituals. The same is true for anger, despair, or envy. These emotions are not sins, as religious dogmas once insisted. They are simply energies, but energies can be transmuted. The alchemists knew this, and so do the awake. If the hidden order creates rituals to keep you in states of contraction, then your task is to create counter-rituals of expansion, gratitude, creativity, joy. These are not sentimental distractions, they are weapons of liberation. Together with friends and sing, to paint, to write, to dance, to sit in stillness beneath the sky. These are acts of rebellion more profound than shouting in the streets. For each moment of authentic joy is energy withdrawn from the machine. Consider how art has always threatened systems of control. A single poem can undo centuries of propaganda. A song can pierce the armor of despair. A painting can reveal truths no speech could articulate. Why? Because art vibrates at frequencies beyond control. It bypasses the rational mind, slipping into the soul like a spark. This is why tyrannies always censor it. It is also why the spiritually awake reclaim art as ritual. Every brushstroke, every note, every word becomes an act of re-enchantment, lifting consciousness into states that cannot be easily harvested by the hidden order. But awakening is not only about grand gestures. It is also woven into the texture of daily life. When you choose what to eat, you choose what kind of energy to embody. Food filled with fear, suffering of animals, the chemical manipulation of crops carries vibration that weighs upon the body. To eat consciously, to honor the act of nourishment, is to shift vibration. When you breathe with awareness, you step outside the cycle of urgency. When you speak truthfully, even in small matters, you dissolve the web of lies that sustains the larger illusion. Every act becomes ritual. Every choice becomes magic. To integrate awakening into reality also requires understanding that withdrawal is not the same as isolation. The awake do not abandon the world. They learn to move through it without becoming food for its machinery. Think of the lotus growing in the mud yet unstained by it. To live awake is to be in the city, but not of it. To walk among illusions without being consumed. You may still work, still use technology, still interact with society. The difference is that you see the stage as stage, the play as play. You no longer mistake the mask for the face. At times, this path can feel lonely. To see what others refuse to see is to walk a road few will recognize. Yet even here lies a hidden strength for every person who awakens and reclaims their energy. The architecture of illusion weakens. You are not alone. Across continents, across cultures, across time itself, others have walked this path. Each act of love, each spark of awareness, each refusal to feed the system becomes part of a greater current, and currents, when joined, become rivers. The integration of awakening also reveals that resistance does not mean confrontation. The hidden order thrives on opposition because opposition still feeds attention into the system. To fight them in anger is to remain bound to their game. True liberation lies in creating outside their rules. Build communities rooted in authenticity, not competition. Share knowledge without the need for a profit. Celebrate without the need for a spectacle. These small acts, multiplied across souls, create a new architecture, one of resonance rather than domination. And yet, let us not romanticize the task. It is not easy. To quit slowly means you will stumble. You will sometimes fall back, interfere, slip into distraction, drown in old habits. But each fall is part of the path. What matters is not perfection, but persistence. Each time you return to awareness, you reclaim more ground. Each time you choose truth over illusion, you step further outside the cage. Awakening is not a destination. It is a practice, a rhythm, a way of moving through life. In the end, the lesson of integration is simple but profound. You cannot defeat the system with fear. You can only transcend it by refusing to participate in its energy games. To withdraw your attention is to starve the machine. To create new rituals of joy, art, love, and truth is to build a new world in the shell of the old. And slowly, patiently, steadily, you become not a pawn on the stage, but an author of your own script. The illusions remain for those who need them. The rituals continue for those who consent. But for you, the spell is broken, and with each broken spell, the dawn grows brighter. The journey of awakening does not end with knowledge. It does not conclude with the unmasking of illusions or the decoding of symbols. Awareness alone, while luminous, is only the beginning. To awaken spiritually is to step into authorship, to claim the quill from the hidden scribes who have written your life, and to write anew with the ink of your own soul. This is the essence of Thoth's whisper: to quit slowly, patiently, but to quit nonetheless, until all that binds you has fallen away. For too long, Humanity has lived as though bound to roles assigned at birth. Son, daughter, student, worker, believer, consumer. These masks are pest-like heirlooms, heavy with expectation. They were never truly yours. They were costumes sewn by a system that thrives on conformity. But the moment you ask, who am I beyond these labels, the prison begins to dissolve. You realize that the bars were made of stories, not steel. The door was never locked. The walls were illusions, painted to look solid, and all along, you held the key. You are not a puppet dangling on the strings of politics, corporations, or rituals long calcified. You are not an actor trapped in someone else's script. You are the author, the stage, the spotlight, and the audience all at once. This world is not fixed, it is woven anew in every moment by the energy you bring to it. And when you withdraw that energy from the machinery of fear and pour it instead into creation, love, and truth, you reweave reality itself. Awakening is not escape. It is remembrance. You are infinite. Consciousness, clothed for a time in flesh, walking through the dream of limitation so that you may rediscover your own vastness. To awaken is to remember that every heartbeat is the universe. Breathing through you, every thought a ripple across eternity. You were never small. You were never powerless. The illusion of powerlessness was simply another story in the grand theater of control. And so, the call now is clear. Quit slowly, but quit surely. Release the chains one by one, with patience and courage. Withdraw your attention from the spectacles that drain you. Refuse the rituals of fear that shrink you. Reclaim your energy, your imagination, your capacity to create. Let each act of joy be a defiance. Let each act of truth be a flame in the dark. Let each act of love be a declaration that the machine no longer owns you. This is not a solitary task. Every soul who awakens contributes to the current of liberation. Every voice that sings outside the script weakens the illusion for all. When you choose awareness, you become a beacon, a reminder that another way is possible. Others will see you and remember their own wings. Others will feel your vibration and be stirred awake. Awakening spreads not by force but by resonance. Like a melody too beautiful to ignore, so stand now at the threshold of your own sovereignty. The stage is still crowded, the actors still loud, the rituals still enacted, but you no longer mistake them for reality. You see the cardboard pillars for what they are. You feel the weight of chains already slipping from your wrists. You sense the horizon calling, vast and uncharted. The whisper of Thoth lingers still. Awakening is not the end. It is the beginning of freedom. And now, that freedom waits not in some distant realm, not in a promised afterlife, but here, in this very breath, in this very choice. Step into it, live it, remember it, for you are never upon, you are always the infinite dressed in disguise, and the time to remember is now.